So Ben, the team did the research and I thought leverage needs we need to leverage Ben. The public needs to know Ben Lyon and the public needs to know the work that you've been doing. And while they were doing their research, this is what they told me to put me to work. We need you to interview this guy. You guys, you guys are similar. You guys have similar ideas. You guys have gone through some similar journey together. Grew up in the States, moved to Africa. I'm originally from Nigeria, so and and then they wanted us to have a conversation. But let me start by giving you a background a little bit about myself. Born and raised here in Nigeria. Went to prime elementary and high school here in Nigeria. And then moved to the DMV area where I went to University of Baltimore and studied accounting, went to Maryland and did my master's, worked for Verizon as a data engineer for 8 years. Then as you know, everyone who lives in the DMV at some point will probably work in the government. Um, I was a government contractor for about 3 years before deciding to go on this entrepreneurial journey. 2018, packed my bags. People thought I was crazy. I thought I was crazy. Moved to Lagos, Nigeria, started a tech company with some partners, and then eventually a tech hub to empower young Africans to be able to do more. I just created a ladder of opportunity. While we were doing that, we thought one of the issues that we need to address as African tech people is education, right? How do we talk to players in this space? How do we talk to founders? How do we talk to operators? How do we peel them like an onion and get their background, get their lessons learned, talk to them about how regulation and the environment has played a role in the work that they're doing here in Africa. And so that's what leverage is. So we created leverage, and the idea is we want people to leverage our platform to get educated on what's going on in the ecosystem. We would have conversations around you, around your business, around things that you might not share in a regular interview. We don't even have enough time to go deep into your background. I saw a fantastic interview with you and PC where I felt like I knew you, right? So I mean, for those who haven't seen that, if you want to learn more about Ben, that would be a good interview to watch. But would like to talk to you about your work, right? Giving you a little bit of a giving you an opportunity to also give us a little bit of a background. So Leverage is a media platform that allows us to share innovation and educate the public on African talent, African founders, African technology, and problems that we're solving, right? I say we are because I'm actually an African founder. So Leverage, we see it as a community of mission-driven founders, tech professionals, and tech professionals in Africa. So, Ben Lyon, you're welcome to Leverage.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you so much, Ben, for doing this. Like I said, very impressed with your work. And just for a few minutes, just tell us who Ben Lyon is. Give us a little bit of background on you. I know you're a Southern boy, lived all over the South, in the U.S. But just tell us about yourself, briefly.
Yeah, I have a kind of an unusual path. Like I mostly identify as a Boy Scout from Arkansas. And my first job was starting a merchant services company in Kenya during the Great Recession. And so it's a very unclear path when I look back on it. I do know that in college, I had been studying economics and international studies. I did a trip to northern Uganda. This was either 2006 or 2007. And something that caught my eye was the MTN Me to You service. So people were transferring, prepaid airtime to one another. Of course, everyone knows this story, right? But to me, that was brand new. That was fascinating. And I didn't realize right next door in Kenya around the same time that they had been piloting the Safaricom M-Pesa service. which was kind of the first mobile money service that reached any scale in Africa. And in 2007, they launched that officially as a service. And so just kind of by luck, I had caught interest in a new industry almost at its very beginning. And then I kept tracking it from that point. And so I was interested in mobile money. I was interested in really more financial inclusion, which now I broadly call fintech. But I was interested in that from a microfinance angle. And when I had graduated uni, I was looking for work. I actually wanted to work for government myself, but I had a liberal arts degree, so I wasn't really employable to the government. A liberal arts degree basically says you know how to learn, but you don't necessarily have a hard skill. And so as I was looking for work for a year after I left university, I had no success at all finding any kind of job. My student loans were about to come due. I had to start making payments on that. And I started just really recognizing that like my energy and my passion was around this topic that I first saw in northern Uganda. And so I started tweeting about it. I just started narrating my work, narrating my interests, learning out loud. And through that, I was very fortunate to identify like-minded people, and ultimately found my first company, which was my first job after uni, was founding a company in Kenya called KOPOKOPO. And you could think about that like Square, but for mobile money acceptance. So I founded that company with two other founders in 2010. I moved to Kenya. I lived there for 5 years. And that's really where I kind of say I cut my teeth on the industry, integrating with Safaricom, multiple banks and telcos, learning about all sorts of businesses. When you do payment acceptance, everybody pays and gets paid, just everybody. So when you're in the payments business, you get to learn a little bit about a lot of things. And coming out of that experience in Kenya, I was just completely hooked. And after 5 years, really in the grinder as a founder, it was a hard time. That company's still doing really well, but it was hard and took a lot from me. And so after I left that and was kind of thinking, what do I want to do? Do I continue on this career? Do I change things? Am I burnt out? I just couldn't look away from the fact that what the opportunities across Africa to do real, fundamental, and lasting things are just without precedent. And when you look at where Africa is going, I think it's by maybe 2050, there will be 2 billion Africans. The future is African. And so the opportunity to see this change from a kind of an early day, like when we moved to Kenya, we saw them painting the walls of the iHub, which was the first co-working space. We saw them painting the walls, and just seeing that rise has been, I think, one of the greatest joys of my career, and continues to motivate me. So I'll stop there, but that's kind of me in a nutshell.
So I could easily say that you're one of the founding fathers of tech in Africa, because we're talking about 2010, right? There weren't so many, right? And today the continent can boast of unicorns, right? And I think, we have a long way to go. I do agree with you that the future is Africa. But the question I was going to ask next was why Africa? But you kind of alluded to that, right? But I want us to dig deeper into that. Tell the public, tell people what it is about Africa and why Africa is the next best investment.
Personally, I was drawn to the continent just from a family connection. My grandfather was a missionary back in the day. He was a recovering missionary later in his life, but he had worked in Congo and partially raised my mother there. And so, I heard these stories. I was interested in this growing up. It felt like there was a connection in the family to the continent. I got this research opportunity when I was in uni that took me to Uganda, and that was actually 1 year after this same grandfather had taken me abroad for the first time. I had never actually traveled internationally before. And we did this trip to Southeast Asia. We did Singapore, Indonesia, East Timor. And so that trip opened my eyes to the world. It really shook me in a lot of ways and made me realize there's so much happening that I don't know about that I wanted to get involved in. And so the next summer I decided, it was really opportunistic. I got this opportunity to go to Uganda. And I think that's what set the path for me. So a little bit of a family connection, seeing what was happening in Uganda at the very kind of beginning of the mobile money industry. That's the personal connection. And then why Africa? Why is this the African future? I think you look at kind of the demographic data. It's apparent that this is going to be the largest or most populous continent on Earth in the not too distant future. And then when you look at kind of the step changes that have happened even in just a decade. So I'm in my mid 30s. I haven't seen that much. I haven't been around that long. But even in the 12 years I've been focused on largely fintech across Africa, we saw some of the first fiber optic cables land in Kenya, the Teams, Easy, Seacom cables. You've seen like the introduction of the first kind of mass market affordable smartphone that was, gosh, was that 2011 or something? That was the Huawei Idios. So to actually just look back on this really a decade and see how quickly the step changes have occurred. It's like we're watching in real time this leapfrogging after leapfrogging. And so I think if you're paying attention and really like focusing on what's happening in Africa, it's just apparent that there's so much energy, there's so much opportunity, there's so much incredible talent, and the infrastructure for people to build on, whether that's the enabling environment, so the universities teaching computer science, whether it's now particularly African founders who have had exits in their companies and now they're able to start investing in the next wave, whether it's cheaper mobile data, like all of that infrastructure is kind of clicking into place, which means, the best time to start building for Africa was yesterday. But today is a good time as well.
That is, I mean, that is fantastic because you put it way better than I would usually put it. Because when people ask me why did you move back, right? Especially Africans who live here, it's hard to fathom the idea of living the United States, a good paying job in the United States and wanting to come be a founder here in Africa. And I would always tell them that in 2018, when I moved back to Nigeria, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the British Prime Minister rather, the German Chancellor, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, all in 1 year, all visited Nigeria. France, all visited Nigeria and made promises to invest in the tech ecosystem in Nigeria, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one country out of, the tens of countries that we have in Africa. But so now you've done this for more than a decade. You've co-founded or founded quite a number of companies. We would like you to talk about Stax because I'm gonna take it from here on all the way back to KOPOKOPO. So we're still gonna talk about KOPOKOPO and your experience. But let's talk about Stax. Tell us about Stax. Why Stax, and what is the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so Stax is a product of Hover. So the company is Hover Developer Services. We actually started with a technology that we tried to sell to developers, but then we changed the business model to Stax and launched that in 2021. And what Stax is really Apple Pay for Africa. So one way to pay from whatever existing accounts you already have. One app where you can pay from your GT Bank account or your Starling Bank account, or you could make a payment from your MTN Momo or your Safaricom M-Pesa. So think about it like a universal money app where you connect all of your money buckets. You can see your receipts in one place, you can send your payments in one place. And really kind of the magical thing about Stax is that it works without mobile data. And so the reason that's important, when you look across Africa, about 87% of smartphone transactions are actually using the offline USSD rail. They're not using internet-based apps. So when you think about what are people actually doing today, they're using USSD to access their money, even if they have a smartphone. And so what we found with our technology was a way to basically screen scrape USSD, but do that in the background of the application. And what that allows us to do is then transform or really evolve the user experience of USSD. And so, USSD is this horrible legacy technology from 1997. Everyone's going to be aware of it, but it's text-based, kind of back and forth. You spend maybe 90 or 120 seconds trying to do a transaction, and then it can fail for any number of reasons. And so that's a bad experience. across Africa today, 94% of digital consumer payments are using USSD. So that's across the general populace. For smartphone users, it's about 87% of transactions. But despite the fact that hundreds of millions of people are using USSD regularly, no one likes it. No one anywhere likes it. The only reason people are using it is it works on every phone and it works without mobile data. And so what we've tried to do is we think about this kind of like the evolution of the internet, where back in 1997, when USSD was introduced, this is the same year that Yahoo Mail was introduced. And you think about really early internet, one of the big step changes in adoption and utility happened when we evolved from just kind of the World Wide Web that existed only for people in CERN and kind of scientists. And that became accessible with the introduction of a browser. So an app interface that was laid on top of this legacy protocol, TCP/IP, and the World Wide Web. And so we think about it like USSD never had the same evolution in that time. It got passed over, but we're going back and doing that work now. So here's the legacy protocol everyone's on top of, and now here's a way to make it way more accessible by just doing something as simple as giving it an interface. So that's what Stax is all about.
I mean, this is brilliant because I've built USSD solutions for clients. I also have co-founded the ball being an incubator. We've also created a lifestyle fintech platform called Settle Me. And we do have a USSD that we're deploying, right? But what you've done is you've taken something so unstructured and you've given it a very fantastic user interface so that it's easy for people to use and people like it, right? Because USSD can be stressful. Those 20 seconds per session could fail for any number of reasons, like you said.
Yeah.
It is fantastic. And so what has the experience been like with Stax?
It's exciting. It's hard. We are a small team. We're very motivated by our mission, which is to build an inclusive internet. And this is when you think about how do you get to there from this idea of like Apple Pay for Africa, it's really about the lack of accessibility of USSD. So you think about if you have like a visual impairment or a motor impairment, USSD is not your friend. It's very hostile to you. And visual impairment, motor impairment, I just described 1 billion people. Now you layer on people who struggle with reading, so literacy issues or numeracy issues, it's another 1 billion people. So what motivates us as a team is really the fact that when you give something an interface, you make it accessible. And this is about managing your money, and it's about discovering what services are available to you and being able to compare the fees of those services. This is about giving people power to make the decisions for their lives, or the best decisions for their lives. And so that's really what's motivating us each day. And then what else has the experience been like? It's hard. It's a startup. Like every startup is hard. Even the ones that you see, like it looks like on Twitter or TechCrunch that they're just killing it and it's just overnight successes. There was blood, sweat, and tears in every one of those startups. And I think kind of my greatest joy through that challenge has been the people I work with. So we really focus as a team on having a strong culture, one where people feel safe to take big risks because we're not thinking small. And so it's taken a lot for me as a leader. It's forced me to learn. It's forced me to continue growing so that I can help my team do the growing and really execute well. And outside of that, I think, where it's been challenging, but this is also our opportunity and what makes us defensible, is that we're dealing with something that is just technically so stupidly complex. It's bizarre how frustrating some of the bugs that we find are. But we're working through it, and kind of you have to always have that North Star, which is your mission, because it's never going to be easy. You're going to be hit with high highs and low lows, and often in the same day. So that's been the experience. Is just the most extreme of startup kind of stories, just like any startup, but a motivated small team that cares about each other and is going to make this happen.
I mean that is fantastic, and in your just a little over a year, you've had 200,000 plus downloads across multiple African markets. You're supported by about 100 plus banks. Um, what would you say has been your most effective marketing strategy? And then also, I'd like to know more about what you do in the FMCG industry.
Yeah, so you mentioned an interview I did with Pisa Timmy, who's wonderful. She's actually our head of growth as well for Stax. And so
Oh,
my best
fantastic.
marketing strategy was hiring Peace. And then and then Peace has built her team and her tools and kind of priorities and really taken that and run with it. And so when you look at the 200,000 plus downloads and users since we launched. Now they're not all active, I'll give you that, but like since launch, that's how many people tried it. That's largely a testament to the work of the growth team under Peace's leadership. And so there are some standard strategies there, like your just kind of paid advertising. So Alphabet and Meta type properties. There's kind of work with influencers and micro influencers. But what we're most excited about is something that's going to appear a little boring. And so we have a website called USSD.directory. And if you'll see this increasingly across different countries in Africa. If you start searching on Google for USSD code for X, you're going to increasingly be landing on this website because we're really pumping up the SEO and really becoming the top result for USSD related questions. And what USSD.directory is kind of the top of the funnel for us. So you come to this website because you're looking for an answer such as, like what's the USSD code for Sterling Bank? You find the answer, but then everything on that site is telling you download Stax, never dial a USSD code again. And so organically, like the last 3 or 4 months, I think we've had about 80 or 90% month over month growth just on kind of SEO clicks on that platform, because it turns out that even though hundreds of millions of people are using USSD, especially across Africa, no one is bidding for this long tail of keywords. No one's talking about USSD just generally. And so we have an opportunity to kind of own that content on the internet. And you could relate this to, say, Wise.com has a similar service where you can look up Swift codes. So if you go right now and you just Google Swift code for HSBC, you're going to see probably a website called bank.codes at the top, followed by a wise.com. Those are both Wise properties, and they're both getting you to download Wise. And so that I'm most excited about because it's organic. People are searching for this information, and it's not being presented to them. And so it's really kind of low-hanging fruit.
I gotta say, it is a fantastic and genius way to market because I did go on that directory, right? And when I saw that, I said, why didn't I think of this? Right? I thought it was genius. And I don't know how much you know. I'm sure you know. USSD codes have been breaking lately. How much do you have to do with that? Are you breaking our USSD codes?
No, no. This is one of the more interesting parts of our work. It turns out that no one in the world, and I mean this, no one in the world and no entity, including telcos, actually knows the success rate of USSD-based services from an end user perspective. No one knows. They're not measuring
That
it.
data is not available. How much it fails, that data is not available.
Between the tower and the SIM card, that's where the blind spot is, even for the telcos. And so they'll maintain like, here's my USSD gateway kind of uptime and stuff, and my server requests. Like they'll do all that side. But you as a user of USSD, I'm sure that you've regularly seen the invalid MMI or MMI incomplete kind of like random message breaks your
Mm.
transaction, or you've been
Yeah.
doing a transaction and it just stops, like the server stops responding. So that hasn't been tracked before. So one of the things that's kind of interesting to us is that as we continue adding support for these services, we're basically screen scraping them. That's how we support over 100 banks and wallets today. But what we're doing also, we're indexing them, which we're giving access to end users through USSD directory. No one's indexed them before. But now that on top of indexing them, we can start adding additional data to that, like what are the fees for various services? We can make that transparent. What's the uptime for various services? Like if you're in a pinch and you're in Nigeria and you have Stax downloaded and you've linked GT Bank, you've linked UBA, you've linked Zenith Bank, and you're trying to use Zenith Bank to send money, we'll get to a point where we could tell you before you send it, hey, Zenith is down right now. Do you want to do this transaction with GT Bank? Or, hey, Zenith is only working 40% of the time. Would you rather try this other channel or take the risk? And so this is all about, like I was saying earlier, putting that power and that information in the hands of the user so that they can make the best decisions for their lives. Because what's happening to people today, like you're describing, like, hey, USSD is breaking, what's going on? People don't know why it's breaking, and incumbents generally, they don't have their feet held to the fire to make their services better. And I think that's why you see underinvestment, particularly from the banks. They don't own the infrastructure that USSD is on. They also don't have kind of the DNA to I think, maintain that well. But what you see from incumbents is they kind of don't care. They're not committing the resources. They're not measuring it. And so you have highly variable reliability across the industry. And so our job is to shine light on that. First, solve the user problem, give the user more power to make a better decision. And then the bigger play that we want to do is shine light on that. And so if your service is reliably failing, that should be something everyone knows. And especially as we gather that data, I could see one day us putting out white papers or just research on this with like the likes of a World Bank or something, just because the failure rates in this industry for something so critical like USSD are unacceptably high, that it's actually, I believe, it's abusing consumers. It's costing, like, it's creating a gray category of, like, if you have to pay 7 Naira every time you dial your USSD code for a bank, but that it takes you three attempts to do a transaction because that code works so poorly, you've paid 7 Naira 3 times. And so the true cost of financial inclusion is actually much higher than what's advertised. So I think that as we shine light on this, I think eventually you'll start seeing regulators compelling incumbents to make their services work.
Yes, let's talk about regulators. How is in Nigeria, NCC is the regulator for USSD. How has that been?
I'm not very informed on it, to be honest, because we're doing something a little different. Like you said, you're building a USSD app, so you're doing, probably working with someone like an Africa's Talking. You're integrating with them at kind of, server level API integrations, and then that's all tightly regulated. Africa's Talking is regulated. They probably have to get NCC's approval to give you a code or a shared code or something like that. So we're playing in a different space, which is why I really can't answer that question in a smart way, because where we're playing is all about how is USSD seen and what results from an end user perspective. So we are not impacted or have not been impacted up until this point by NCC decisions, because we don't provision USSD codes. We're not integrating with bank APIs. We don't have a local entity. We don't require a local entity. One of the main reasons for this is that with our play, Stax looks like a wallet, but it's not a wallet. You're linking your existing financial accounts to what is effectively a utility app. So Stax is just a utility app that passes instructions to these regulated financial institutions. The key to that then is that we are not holding your money. We don't ever hold your money. We don't have a wallet for you to put money into. You're making payments from GT Bank in Stax, so we don't hold your money. We also don't process your payments. And that was a deliberate choice early in the company, because that is not regulated activity. That's perfectly lawful activity. And so this is to come back and say that I don't pay much attention actually to what, say, MEFI is doing in the morning or what NCC is doing, because we designed a space where we can kind of go through it without them.
So Ben, when we were creating Settle, I wrote on my board, build a digital inclusion platform that is not regulated. And I we started building, and when we started doing our research and we started looking for all kinds of ways to circumvent regulators, and we could not. Today, we have a vast license. So we're regulated by NCC because we do issue codes, and we also have a code that we manage, right? And we also want to go. So we haven't launched. So we've built. So we're about to launch. So we're going to be issuing codes for those who want to access NCC USSD codes. We're also going to be issuing shared codes, right? So we are regulated there. We're regulated by CBN because we're getting some payment licenses as well. So now hearing that you actually were successful in building something that is maybe just data protection regulation is the only thing that affects you, it's impressive. I have to give it to you. So Stax is your newest baby. It's doing well. Before we go to KOPOKOPO, I want to talk to you about your biggest challenge building in Africa.
Yeah, that's a gosh, over what time, right? Over the last 12 years, there have been so many challenges. I think I think when you look at Hover today, the company behind Stax, we built a lot of my personal lessons from the last, from KOPOKOPO and then from sitting on the investor side with DFS Lab. I did that for 7 years in total between KOPOKOPO and DFS Lab. Um, and the lessons from those experience are very much baked into the DNA of our company. And
Okay.
so, I made a point of saying we don't hold money, we don't process payments. That was a big lesson. That comes from a big challenge from before where we had internal and external fraud various times, across my first company. I've seen it multiple times from kind of the investor perspective. This applies to fintech generally. It's not like an Africa thing. It's just like when you're managing money, if you achieve any kind of scale, the organized criminals find you. They come to you. It's almost like a mark of pride when the organized criminals start trying to hit you because that means that you're big enough now for them to consider you. And so you have to be very cautious when managing people's money, to just prevent those things from happening. So I'd say that's kind of the biggest lesson. It's why we decided not to touch money. Um, I also made a point, especially this was accelerated through COVID. We have a remote kind of global office. We don't have a physical location anywhere. We chose a strategy that, again, this is a utility app. It's not a wallet, actually. We're not circumventing regulation. This is perfectly lawful activity in the law as it exists today. And what that allows us to do is operate without a local entity. One of the things I saw from DFS Lab is that you often see startups raising in Africa, even at the pre-seed or seed stage, they're talking immediately about how they're going to go to the next country. And one of the reasons for that is you have 50 plus countries. Only a few of those economies are large enough, in terms of like total addressable market to pull venture capital dollars. And so what you often see is startups trying to talk about their regional or Pan-African strategy from the very beginning. And then the challenge that you have with that is that now you have 50 plus, and truthfully, because you have central banks, you have legislatures, you have communications commissions, you actually have several hundred relevant regulators across Africa. And so on the one hand, for you to go out and raise money, you need to tell this Pan-Africa story. On the other, to achieve a Pan-African success, you have to find a way to navigate hundreds of relevant regulators. And some of those regulators can change their minds 3 times in a day. So how do you plan? How do you build in that level of uncertainty? And so this was, again, where we made a choice, like, let's identify a path as best we can where we can try and play a different game. And so you brought up one of the things I think about, which is like the data protection kind of regulations. And so I take this lesson looking at Apple, where what I'd like to get to is a point where we can say basically, I don't know anything about our users. I have no data about our users. When you hack our servers, you won't find any personally identifiable information. You won't be able to use that data against our users because it's encrypted in a way that we can't decrypt. We don't have the keys. And so the summary here is to come back and say that often when you find yourself hitting your head against a wall, pay attention to that and play a different game. And that's what I've tried to do, and that's because of facing these challenges, whether it's organized crime, changing regulations, people management. These are not challenges in Africa. These are startup challenges.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fantastic. So before Stax, before Hover, you spent some time in DFS, but before that, you had actually built something that's a living success now, KOPOKOPO. Tell us about that.
Yeah, gosh, that was lucky. That was very lucky. So I kind of look at myself in 2010. Now this was I've learned some since then, but I kind of identified as like an expat at the time. I was an economic migrant, is what I was in Kenya. I landed there in 2010, and we were looking at originally we didn't start in the merchant space. So what KOPOKOPO became is, if you're a retail business, you can sign up with KOPOKOPO, and now you can accept Safaricom M-Pesa at the point of sale. You can get a card terminal now. You can accept Visa, MasterCard, China Union Pay, and additional things like that. But you can also get access to cash advances as a merchant. So basically like a loan service where
And M-Pesa, and sorry, I'm gonna jump in, right? Because this is very interesting, and I want everyone that's gonna listen to this to really pick this up. It seemed like you find a loophole in M-Pesa's business, or you found an opportunity of what M-Pesa could have been doing and they weren't doing.
That's right. Yeah, so they did not realize yet. This was 2010. So M-Pesa was piloted in 2005 and launched commercially, I think, in 2007. So it's been around for about 3 years at this point. It has, at this point in history, become really a dominant kind of domestic remittance service and a way to make airtime scratch cards redundant. So kind of pushing the whole airtime agent network, like making them useless, frankly. And so what Safaricom was sitting on at the time was a domestic remittance system. They didn't yet seem to realize that they were actually sitting on top of the payment system. And payments are two-sided. There's issuing and acquiring. And so they had just at the time, we would talk, like when we pitched investors, we would say, like, imagine that 7 out of 10 adults were walking around with a debit card in their pocket, but there were only 100 point of sale machines in the entire country. That would be obviously a mismatch. And so that was kind of where we were in Kenya when we started this merchant play. Safaricom only had about 100 businesses that formally accepted M-Pesa at the point of sale. Most of them didn't actively push it. One of the reasons behind that was Safaricom hadn't realized that a business is not a subscriber. Telcos know subscribers. They think about subscribers and they think about SIM cards and getting everything in SIM slot one. That's what they know. They don't know small businesses. And so the gap that we identified, it was like, first, let's make it easier for you to get the business account. That was a very messy process that the telco hadn't really considered. They weren't designing well. So let's give you a better way to get access to a business account. Let's get it to you faster. And then it was what differentiated us was now building on merchant services. So you need a dashboard to see your transactions. You need a way to download statements. You need a way to search for transactions. This is basic stuff. But like if you were a merchant before KOPOKOPO, you didn't actually have a way to search for your transactions. So you would have to literally, you could only sign up for the M-Pesa business portal if you had Internet Explorer 7 or below. You had to get a security certificate from Safaricom to access that website at all. To do that, you had to attend about a 5-hour training that could have been an email. And at which point you finally get provisioned your business account. And now you start accepting M-Pesa. Oh no, now you can't even withdraw your money until you have at least $500 in there. And when you do, it takes a week to get to you. So they just hadn't done anything for this small business, because what small businesses need is very fast access to money. So like settlement time matters. When you're in a retail setting, you've got someone at your desk. You need to be able to solve that problem quickly. So like searching for their transaction, the ability to refund it, return it, anything like that. That's what we did. And it really just came down to this gap. And I would hold that this is true today for other entrepreneurs. Just if you're competing with a telco, whatever they say, they're addicted to SIM slot one, and they're addicted to subscriber thinking. They can't get out of that. And so if they're trying to compete with you in a space that's not that, hold the line, you will win.
So I'm glad you said that. I've seen a bank go develop a payment application to compete with the fintechs of the world. I've seen telcos come up with all kinds of applications, and then they want to compete. And they're doing this because they hear about the amount of investor capital that fintechs are raising, and it's not their space. And I've always said that, right? Connecting lines and selling airtime and data is their business, right? And I remember when I was at Verizon, for us to get out of that, we had to go from a telco to a techco, right? And that was the strategy then. And the idea was put a smartphone in everyone's hands and put all types of features on that smartphone that they're going to use data to access. So if you remember, I don't know if you ever used Verizon. They had NBA Pass, NFL Pass, roadside assistance, and all these features that were on these smartphones. That as long as you have a Verizon smartphone, you're connected to everything, and the more you use it, the more data you use, and the more your plan has to go up. Um, but here, no one has decided to go that route because they're making so much money from their main business. So, I mean, I really agree with you. If you're competing with any of these guys, stick it out. They have money, but they don't have time to do the work that you're ready to do as a founder. Thank you for that. So let's go back to Stax. So what does the future hold for Stax?
Hopefully Pan-African, like we want to be, we say Apple Pay for Africa, we mean for all of Africa's, the plural, like so tens of countries, hundreds of currencies, languages, dialects, one universal app for your money that works with or without a data connection with whatever existing account you have, and becomes really a gateway to borderless commerce, and to financial services. So if we can, I was saying earlier, like it's really about Stacks is about giving power to the user, and that starts with making this more accessible. Giving them more information about what services cost, how reliable they are, so that they can compare and choose. And then that becomes a gateway for us to layer on additional services. In particular, I think one of the things that you can't do with USSD is discover. So like discovery across USSD doesn't happen because it's there's not like a search engine for it. But now we have that kind of opportunity where we can start, once we've replaced your primary habit from USSD with an app, now we can start surfacing all sorts of relevant information to you. It could be, here are loans that are available to you that you can apply for today. Here are savings accounts you can open. Here are, decentralized financial services. I don't know, you want to buy, sell crypto. It's just, we think about this like Apple Pay as a utility. So we say Apple Pay for Africa, but really we're thinking offline payment super app. So how can we extend the edges of the internet? How can we bring more and more rich functionality to a smartphone experience, even when a user is offline? So it moves from just payments to all sorts of services. That's really the vision for us.
What comes to mind is then I look at the smartphone penetration in Africa. How has that been a problem for you?
It's not. It's an opportunity. Next year, there should be about 600 million smartphones on the continent. They're almost all Androids. So it's a great opportunity for us. If we were building an internet-dependent app, I would be concerned because the relative cost of data is going up in many markets across Africa, especially as you look at like the price of petrol and food. people have less money. And so when they have less money, they're cutting back on things like mobile data, even though mobile data tends to go last. People want to prioritize connectivity and entertainment, but people have less money. And so if you had an internet dependent app, then for the next couple of years, your market's not really growing. It's kind of in a stagnant first user. And there will be hundreds of millions of smartphones. There are now, but there will be like 600 million next year. And so it's not a problem for us as much as like a big opportunity that I think we're almost uniquely focused on, because as that mobile data, those prices go up. I think there were two telcos in Nigeria just raised their prices. They might have brought them back down. But as those continue to go up, as affordability becomes more and more of an issue, where will you go to manage your money? You know, here will be Stax. It's free to download. You don't have to register when you sign up. It's just a simple utility, works with everything offline. So that's how I think about that.
And I'm glad you also mentioned the type of growth that we're going to be seeing with the smartphones for Africans. A company that I know, M-Copper, is doing a good job with Africans having access to smartphones and financing this for them. So more and more we'll continue to see the growth of smartphones, and then the more smartphones in people's hands, I guess the more people can download Stacks and use your product. I gotta say congratulations on all of your successes. Thank you so much for doing this. What advice would you give to two sets of people, right? So you and I are crazy enough to leave the US and come here and see the opportunity and try to tap into it and build something here. What advice would you give to anyone over there looking at you and saying, um, you know, maybe my options are Silicon Valley, but untapped resources, the market is big, it's growing. What advice would you have for someone like that? Also, the local talent here, what would you tell them? Because you realize that we're having a major immigration issue in Africa. Some of our best talents are leaving for the West, right?
Mhm.
What would you say to local talents?
Yeah, I'd maybe blend my answers into one. And I think it would be kind of first find your niche or niche. I've never known how to pronounce that word, but like find your niche. There are riches in niches is kind of the phrase. Um, my niche, I was very fortunate to be in the right moment in time and kind of learning out loud when this was an early industry. And that helped lift my profile from nothing. Boy Scout from Arkansas. I wasn't plugged into this stuff. And so, yeah, find your niche. My niche was kind of mobile money at an early time. Learn out loud. Talk about what you're interested in with your friends. Do it online. Start building a community around it, because what you'll find, and everyone here I'm sure uses Twitter or something like that, you'll find your tribes. And so to find your tribes, you have to put yourself out there. And you will find like-minded individuals. You'll get invited to those closed doors. So you have to put yourself out there and find your niche. And I think that's the best way to do that and stand out from the crowd. Um, I think the other part of your question, I would just say, like, I think it's important to share that I have imposter syndrome. Every person I know that I trust has imposter syndrome. I know hundreds of founders, I think, from over the years. And so if you're thinking about doing your own leap, I know this sounds like cheap throwaway advice, but it's absolutely real. No one knows what they're doing. They really don't. So if you're not feeling so sure about something, why not try? Why not take that leap if you can? I know that requires some amount of privilege or a safety net, but just have the confidence to know that no one knows what they're doing. And so, there are going to be a
I,
lot of
I, I
people.
always I always say if you know what you're doing, then you should be ahead. You shouldn't be where you are, right? So I mean you make a great point there. Um, Thank you so much for that. I don't think we have any other questions, but but I actually have one personally. How many countries have you lived in Africa, and which one is your favorite? Which one is your favorite? What city is your favorite city?
Interesting. Yeah, so I have traveled to probably 20 to 30 countries in Africa over the last 12 years. I have only lived in Nairobi. And so I've spent,
Okay.
months in many countries across the continent, but I've really only lived in Nairobi and I was there for 5 years. So, I met my wife there. I had kind of the best and worst experiences of a startup there. So I'm really attached to the city.
Yeah.
Would I live in Nairobi again? Probably not, because one of my favorite things of it was going to the coast and enjoying that. So you're asking my favorite country or city. I don't know if I have one.
No, city, your favorite city.
I don't have one that immediately comes to mind. There are so many pros and
When
cons.
next are you when next are you in Lagos? Let's make Lagos your favorite city.
Sounds like a plan.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ben. This has been very awesome. I will get your contact from the team. I want to stay in touch with you. I think there is more that we can do together in educating this continent.
Yeah, my pleasure. Please do. And thanks for your
Thank
work. It was great to be here.
thank you very much.